Hey everybody, today I want to talk about the Beatles Anthology albums. There's Beatles Anthology 1, Anthology 2, and Anthology 3. And what I want to do in this video is talk about the good and the bad of these anthology albums. Now, I grew up with these albums. I'm a kid of the 90s, so the Anthology 1 came out, I believe it was November of 1995, and then Anthology 2 was March of 96, and then I think this was Anthology 3 was October of 96. The first time I got the Anthology albums was Christmas of 96. I remember I got Anthology 2 on CD, and my brother got Anthology 1, and then I think it was like a year or so after that, and then I picked up Anthology 3. So I've had these albums in my collection for a very, very long time, and the very first vinyl pressing of Anthology I got was this Anthology 2. And as you can see, it is well worn. The spine has seen better days. It was chewed on by a previous cat, not Bob the cat. We had another cat, and she did a little bit of chewing on there, but that's okay. But I've had this for a long, long time, Anthology 2. I've had this for, I don't know, over 20 years. I think the next one I got was Anthology 1, and then I finally got Anthology 3. Now, these are very, very hard to find now, these vinyl pressings of the anthologies online, at least for me. I've never seen a copy of Anthology in one of my record stores, and all Anthology 1 and Anthology 3 I had to pick up online, and they go for really, really high prices now. And if you're wondering what specific pressings I have, Anthology 1, this is a UK press of the album. Anthology 2 is also a UK pressing, but then Anthology 3, this is a US pressing. So, and if you're wondering if there's big differences in the sound quality, I'm sure there probably is, but I've never really compared them in the sense of comparing a UK versus a US pressing and all that kind of stuff. I've heard from what I've read online that the UK pressings tend to be a bit better. But anyway, so that's a little bit of a backstory on the anthology, my own personal relationship with the anthology. I've had a lot of experience with it, but what I want to talk about in this video is the good and the bad. So first off, let's talk about the good. So I have some notes here. The good. When the anthology albums came out, this was the first time that the Beatles had really opened up their vaults and just released a lot of unreleased stuff that the fans didn't really know about, or they kind of knew about, but we're finally getting some of these songs in really, really good quality. So that was an amazing thing. I remember when I first got Anthology 2, being blown away by songs like That Means a Lot, which I didn't even know existed at that point, and I really liked it. And then even like If You Got Troubles, which I know is kind of a funny throwaway song that Ringo sings, but I've always liked it. That one was interesting to me. 12 Bar Original was even interesting to me because I didn't know it existed. And then like having alternate takes of like I'm Looking Through You on Anthology 2 is one of my favorite Beatle outtakes. It's just a very, very cool version of I'm Looking Through You. So there were a lot of really, really just kind of mind-blowing things that were released on the anthology albums. And even to this day, some of those songs are some of my favorite Beatles songs. Like That Means a Lot. I know a lot of people kind of overlook that song, but That Means a Lot I think is a really, really, really cool song. I love the recording of it. I love how it's just drenched in reverb. And I know, of course, that the version on Anthology 2 is a version that was mixed by Jeff Emmerich much later, I think in like the 1980s. And he added all that extra reverb and just did his own kind of mix on it. So that probably isn't how it would have sounded in 1965 if they released it on the Help album. But I still like it as it is. Some other good aspects of the anthology. So I should probably go back a little bit. So my first favorite thing, the good about the anthologies, is all the unreleased material that we got from these albums. At a time when it went from 0 unreleased Beatle recordings to a bunch with these anthology albums. So that was definitely a good thing. The next thing is a bunch of great live material on the anthology albums, and specifically Anthology 1. There is the amazing, almost the full concert of, I believe it was in Sweden, and you get, let's see, what are the songs? It's like, I Saw Her Standing There, From Me to You, Money, You Really Got a Hold of Me, and Roll Over Beethoven. They're just excellent, excellent live recordings of the Beatles, and the Beatles sound absolutely fantastic, and it really shows how tight they were as a band. And that little mini concert remains a highlight for me of Anthology 1. There's also some great live cuts on Anthology 2. I like there's the Blackpool Night Out. There's a couple of songs from that. I think it's like Help's on there, Ticket to Ride, and they're very, very cool as well. They're definitely like kind of rough around the edges as far as the Beatles' performances, but they're still very, very good. So some very interesting live cuts for sure. And then the next great aspect of the anthology albums, of course, you get 2 brand new Beatles songs. So you get Free as a Bird on Anthology 1. Then we got Real Love on Anthology 2. There was not a new Beatles song on Anthology 3, and we'll talk about that later. But Free as a Bird and Real Love were definitely mind-blowing events if you were a Beatle fan. I remember the hype for Free as a Bird was so big back in 1995. Actually, 94 was when they first started talking about it. I remember being, I don't know how old I was in 94. I think I was like 10 or something like that. But I remember it was a very, very big deal that there was going to be a new Beatles song, and that Paul and George and Ringo had recorded a new song with John Lennon, basically from John's old demo. That was a very, very big deal. And I remember staying up, watching the anthology on TV, the documentary, and after the first episode, they were going to premiere Free as a Bird. And with my whole family, we were all just so excited. We couldn't wait to like see this new video with this new song. They played it, and it was, I'll never forget the feeling of just, for the first time, I was experiencing a new Beatles song. And of course, my parents had been able to do that because they grew up in the 60s. But it was such a moment for me and my brother to experience that same thing with my parents. So I always kind of remember that when I listen to Free as a Bird. I get that really like special feeling. And I liked the song right away, by the way. I know there were some people that it took a while for them to get into Free as a Bird, but right away I liked the song. I thought it was so haunting, and just John's voice sounded very, very weird, but kind of cool at the same time. And then when Real Love came out the next year, I was just as excited for it, but it definitely didn't have the same kind of magic and anticipation as Free as a Bird, just because Free as a Bird was the first one. But I also really liked Real Love. And now, when I look back and I think about those 2 songs, Real Love is my favorite of the 2, but I like them both a lot. So when those songs came out on the anthologies, that was a very big deal, and they're still really, really great songs, I think. Next up, The Good. I love all of the studio like banter, all the talking the Beatles did in between takes, and it really shows just how close they were as friends. And the anthologies, to me, that's one of the main things I love about the anthologies, is that the Beatles' personalities really come through on these albums. They're so funny, first of all. All 4 of them are just hilariously funny. They're all so quick, and that all comes through on the anthologies. Obviously, this is a major understatement, but they're also musical. And when you listen to the anthologies, you really get a strong idea. These 4 guys were just so musical, it's insane. Just even when they're like practicing their part, like a vocal part before the take or whatever, and you hear it on the anthology, you just get an idea that these guys were in full control of their vocals, of their instruments, and it's just a fascinating thing to listen to on anthology. And one of my favorite things is on anthology 1, the outtakes for 8 Days a Week, where John and Paul are working on the vocals, and they're doing these tight harmonies together, and they're joking around with each other. But even while they're joking around, their voices still sound amazing, and it just is a fascinating look into how they recorded. And to this day, I will go back and listen to that outtake from 8 Days a Week, and it always puts a smile on my face and puts me in a good mood. So definitely love the studio outtakes and the little in-between banter that are featured on anthology albums. Okay, and there are lots of other great things about the anthology albums as well, but let's move on to what I consider some of the bad aspects of the anthology albums. First off, the sound quality. All of the anthology albums have this weird, what I will call extra narrow stereo image. So vintage Beatles albums, stereo Beatles albums, have wonderful, in my opinion, stereo image, meaning that it's a very wide stereo image. Like if you were to put on like the German pressing of the Help album, for example, that's like one of my favorite pressings of it. It has just beautiful stereo separation, very, very wide. You get a very, it presents a clear, just a clear soundscape is what I call it, where you can hear all the instruments so well. It's such a nice stereo setup. On the anthologies, it is very, very narrow, almost like they're mono. Now there are a lot of mono mixes on the anthology albums, and that's okay. I'm not against mono. But the stereo mixes are just so narrow that they almost sound mono. And I know there have been a lot of people on like the Beatle forums and like in the bootleg world that have actually electronically enhanced the stereo image on the anthology albums to make them a lot wider. And I have some of those on my computer, and they do sound a lot better, and they make the anthologies a lot more enjoyable to listen to. And when you hear what people are capable of doing as far as widening the stereo image, it really makes you aware of how narrow the stereo image is on these anthology albums. Now, I don't know why they decided to do that, but it's definitely something that that bothers me for sure. And I wish that they would maybe put out, re-release the anthology albums, which I'm sure they will at some point, but there are no plans for that I'm aware of. But it'd be great if they did like a remastered version of the anthology albums, and hopefully if they do, they widen the stereo image. So that's one of the negative aspects of the anthology for me. Next up, the Frankenstein edits, I call them. So on anthology, they took a lot of liberty with editing certain takes down. For example, like on Anthology 3, there's a take of Helter Skelter. I believe it's I think it's take 3 of Helter Skelter. I could be wrong, but it's Helter Skelter on here, and they've massively edited it down and kind of moved parts around, like just way too much. In fact, on the Super Deluxe edition of the White Album, we get the full take of Helter Skelter that appears on Anthology, and you can really hear how much they edited down for the Anthology album. Now, I totally understand that there was a space concern, and they didn't want songs to be too long. That's fine. What I'm talking about is cutting out a guitar solo or something and putting it sooner in the song, and replacing maybe a verse with another verse, maybe a chorus with another chorus, that kind of thing, which I call Frankenstein edits. That kind of stuff bothers me because it's inauthentic to me. I want to hear the take as it was. So, because that's what's fascinating to me. And as interesting as it is to maybe piece together certain songs, it just kind of bothers me. And there are a lot of instances on these anthologies where they have done that. Specifically, like, I know they did that on, let's see, what is it? On Anthology 1, let's see. Oh, yeah. How Do You Do It? I know they edited that around where they took one verse and put it somewhere else. Same with One After 909. They edited that song together to make it into one complete take. And while I respect that they wanted to make it into one complete take, there's just something weird about that to me. Also, just lots of other instances where they've done that on the anthologies, and it just kind of bothers me a little bit. So the next thing that really bothered me about the anthologies is the lack of certain Holy Grail recordings within the Beatles mythology. The biggest example of that would be on Anthology 2, they could have included a song called Carnival of Light. Carnival of Light is a sound collage that the Beatles made while they were working on the song Penny Lane. Paul McCartney was commissioned by this, I guess it was like a London happening that was happening in London, and the people putting it together wanted to have some background music to go on during this event. So they asked Paul McCartney if he would do something. So during a session for Penny Lane, he told the other guys about this, and they made this avant-garde sound collage called Carnival of Light, because that was the name of the show, Carnival of Light. And it was this long, just crazy kind of jam session where anything goes. And they made it and they gave it to these people. They played it at their show. It was never heard from again, but it remains in the EMI archives. And it was going to be released on Anthology 2. Paul McCartney was really pushing for it, but George Harrison at the last minute said he didn't want it to be on there. He thought it took up too much space and it was kind of boring, so they didn't end up releasing it. But I think that was a big missed opportunity, because really the only place that song could ever be released is on an album like Anthology 2, or, and they missed it again, it could have been released on the Sgt. Pepper Super Deluxe Edition as well, and they didn't release it there either. So, big missed opportunity in my opinion. Another big missed opportunity is Anthology 3. There is the really long version of Helter Skelter that Mark Lewison talks about in his book that is, he just says it's super crazy, it goes on forever, it's the Beatles just rocking out. They didn't include that on Anthology 3. So, and there are other instances of Beatle recordings that are known to exist that they didn't include on the anthologies, which was a bit of a letdown, because they did include some stuff on the anthologies that a lot of people thought didn't understand quite the reason why they included it. Like the instrumental version of Eleanor Rigby on here on Anthology 2, instrumental version of Within You Without You, kind of throwaways, because they're just the versions we're all used to, just without the vocals. And we would have much rather had a new Beatles song, a new Beatle recording, instead of those just instrumental versions. But that's what they did, and oh well. Next up, the Anthology 1 started out with like a documentary style, where they had a bunch of really interesting bits of dialogue from the Beatles themselves, from Brian Epstein, and that would play into certain songs. They would like talk about the Decca audition. They'd talk about recording their first single, all that kind of stuff. It was very interesting to have that on here. But then on Anthology 2, which is right here, they completely abandoned that altogether. So Anthology 1 runs and plays a lot different than Anthology 2 and 3, just because it has this like documentary style going along with it. Now, I think it would have been cool to keep that going throughout all the Anthology albums, because I really like it on Anthology 1. I like hearing Paul talk about how they would borrow an old tape recorder from a friend, how Brian Epstein would talk about how he discovered the Beatles. All that stuff is really interesting to me, and it would have been cool to keep that going on Anthology 2 and Anthology 3. But they didn't do it, and not really sure why, but there you go. And next up, and this is the last thing I will mention, for Anthology 1 and 2, we got brand new Beatles songs, Free as a Bird and Real Love. But in Anthology 3, we did not get a new Beatles song. So the story goes that Paul, George, and Ringo did have intentions of releasing a third new song of John's, and they even worked on a couple of them. The two songs that I know that they worked on were Grow Old With Me and a song called Now and Then. And I don't know if they did any work on Grow Old With Me at all, but they definitely had Grow Old With Me on a cassette tape that Yoko had given them, and they were considering it. But they did, it is confirmed, they did do some early work on Now and Then. And that song remains unreleased, and Paul McCartney has talked about how he one day he wants to go back in with Jeff Lynne, and Jeff Lynne was the producer that was helping them work on these new songs. He wants to go back in with Jeff Lynne and finish Now and Then, which I think would be fantastic. But again, this is a situation where George Harrison, decided he didn't really like the song, and he was just kind of not feeling it and didn't want to work on any more of the new Beatles songs. And that's why they put it to an end, and they didn't include a new Beatles song on Anthology 3. And it's very much lacking, because Anthology 1 leads off with Free as a Bird. Anthology 2 leads off with Real Love. And then when Anthology 3 comes along, it leads off with, in my opinion, the most boring piece of music on the anthology albums, a song called A Beginning, which was originally recorded during the White Album time period by George Martin and the George Martin Orchestra. And it was going to be put at the very front of Ringo's song Don't Pass Me By. They didn't end up using it because I think it's a bit of a boring piece of music. And instead, they just stuck it on Anthology 3, and it's just, I don't know, it's just a nothing song for me, really. So those are the anthology albums, and those are just a couple of my opinions about them. Overall, though, I do love the anthology albums, and I think they are essential albums to own in your Beatle collection. And if I had to pick my favorite of all the anthology albums, I would probably choose Anthology 2, just because this Anthology 2 to me has the most unreleased material that I really, really like. Like That Means a Lot, If You Got Troubles, 12-bar original, and then the outtakes for alternate takes for I'm Looking Through You, amazing. I'm Only Sleeping, like an early acoustic version, which is great. It's just got pretty much everything I love about the anthologies. Anthology 2 has it all for me. But I love them all. They're all fantastic, and like I said, all of them are worth owning. If you can track them down, I recommend it. I know they go for a lot of money these days, and I think that's a shame. I think they should re-release the anthologies, remaster them, put them out on vinyl again. But I don't know. I don't see that happening anytime soon. So if you can hunt these down, please do. They're excellent. Yeah, so that's it for today. I'd love to know in the comments below what you think of the anthology albums. And stay tuned for more videos. Take care, and bye for now.